everyone, and welcome to Beneath the Sandalwood Tree. Today, we're not talking about some ghost in a forgotten building or a whispered curse in the jungle. We're talking about something far colder, far more real. The look in a friend's eyes right before they kill you. Jessica Wongzo, a graphic designer by trade, a woman who knew her way around lines and shadows, found herself at the center of a case that tangled up friendships, foreign degrees, and a glass of Vietnamese iced coffee. The kind of story where the devil doesn't show up in a red suit with a pitchfork, but in a designer dress with a sinister smile. A story about a woman who came home not to rekindle old friendships, but to extinguish one. A woman's past is a long shadow, and Jessica Wongzo stretched all the way back to Jakarta, where she was born on October 9th, 1988. She had two older siblings, but in a city of millions, a person can still feel like a lonely island. Her family was in the plastics business, making parts for bikes, the kind of things that hold a machine together. But something in Jessica's own works seemed to have gone wrong. She'd left Indonesia for a time, chasing a life in Sydney, Australia, but had found trouble instead. Now she was back, and the plastic parts she'd grown up with suddenly seemed a lot like the pieces of a puzzle she was putting together. One that spelled out murder. A person's life is a string of decisions, and for Jessica Wongzo, the decisions she made after 2005 were all leading to a single point. Her family had packed up their lives and moved to Sydney, Australia, where she became a permanent resident, a ghost of her former self in a new country. She enrolled at the Billy Blue College of Design, spending 4 years, from 2008 to 2012, learning how to make things look good on paper. But behind the veneer of a successful graphic designer, something else was brewing, a darkness that would finally come to a head on Wednesday, January 6th, 2016. That was the day she walked into the Olivier restaurant at Grand Indonesia in central Jakarta, a place of good food and good company with a very bad plan. She had a purpose, a cold, hard purpose, to take someone's life. The world is full of broken friendships, but this one was built on something even more fragile. Jessica and Mirna Salihin had met at the Billy Blue College of Design in Sydney, a campus where they were supposed to be building dreams, not digging graves. They were friends, the kind that share secrets and late-night laughs. But somewhere along the line, in the middle of 2015, the laughter turned to dust. There was a fight, a disagreement, a moment when one person gave advice and the other took it as a betrayal. It was a poison that seeped into the cracks of their relationship, slowly eating away at the trust. It was the kind of thing that could have been fixed with an apology, but instead, it was settled with a death. Mirna knew her friend's business, and she'd seen the trouble Jessica was courting. A man who was no good, a man who hit her and used drugs. So Mirna did what friends do. She gave advice. "What's the point of dating a man who's no good and has nothing to offer?" she said. A simple question, an honest piece of advice. But it was a match to a fuse. Jessica didn't take it as a kindness. She took it as a betrayal, a cutting remark that carved a new wound in her pride. The words weren't a plea, they were a death sentence for their friendship. And so Jessica cut all ties. Not just for a day or a week, but with a finality that spoke of more than just a hurt ego. It was the moment the poison started to brew, long before it ever touched a cup of coffee. The dust settled, but the anger didn't. After the fallout with Mirna, Jessica's life took a wrong turn, a long, winding road that led straight to a police station in Australia. Her relationship with that boyfriend, the one Mirna had told her to leave, finally went up in smoke. And with the smoke came trouble, legal trouble, the kind that sticks to a person like bad luck. In her mind, every scrape with the law, every piece of paperwork, every piece of her life that was falling apart was Mirna's fault. Mirna had given the advice. Mirna had started the slide. The resentment festered in Jessica's gut like a poison, and she decided there was only one way to make it right. Not with an apology, not with an explanation, but with a plan to take the one thing Mirna had left, her life. Jessica's return trip from Australia wasn't about a reunion. It was about revenge. The long flight across the ocean gave her plenty of time to hatch her plan, and the first step was to get back on Mirna's radar. On December 5th, 2015, she pulled out her phone and sent a message on WhatsApp, a digital olive branch extended with a poisoned heart. She reached out, trying to reconnect, to lure her old friend back into her life, but Mirna didn't bite. The silence on the other end of the line was a dead end, a moment of suspense in a story that was already written. It was a minor delay, a hiccup in a plan that was already in motion. Jessica would just have to try again. The plane landed, and Jessica stepped out into the Jakarta heat on December 6th, 2015. She didn't waste any time. The next day, she tried the line to Mirna again, and this time, it was answered. She laid her cards on the table, telling Mirna she was in town and wanted to meet. Mirna, unsuspecting of the cold fire burning behind the friendly voice, agreed. They met at a cafe in North Jakarta, but it wasn't just the two of them. Mirna had her husband, Arif Setiawan Sumarko, with her. Jessica smiled and made small talk, playing the part of the long-lost friend. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. She wasn't there to reconnect with a friend. She was there to size up her target. The meeting was just a reconnaissance mission, a first step in a deadly game where Mirna, with her happy marriage and her unsuspecting heart, was the prize. After that initial meeting, the trap was set, but it needed to be sprung. Jessica worked the phone, a digital puppet master pulling on invisible strings. She was on WhatsApp with Mirna, sending messages, keeping the conversation alive, acting like a friend who just couldn't get enough. On December 15th, 2015, she made her move, asking Mirna to create a group chat. Mirna, always trusting, always the connector, did it without a second thought. She named the group Billy Blue Days, a nostalgic nod to their college days, and added Jessica, Hani, and Vera. In that group chat, Jessica was the one who pushed for a meetup, suggesting they get together on January 6th, 2016. She even picked the spot herself, Olivier Restaurant at Grand Indonesia. Mirna, with no idea she was walking into a spider web, simply agreed. She saw it as a reunion. Jessica saw it as the final check on a very dark to-do list. The date was set, the location chosen, and Mirna, with a friendly smile, sealed her own fate. The morning of January 6th, 2016 wasn't about friendship. It was about a clock counting down. At 12:58 p.m., Jessica sent a message into the Billy Blue Days chat, a digital call to action disguised as a friendly gesture. She offered to treat Mirna, Hani, and Vera, letting them know she'd get to the Olivier restaurant early to grab a good spot. Mirna, always cheerful, always unsuspecting, took the bait. She chimed in, mentioning how much she loved the Vietnamese iced coffee at that very place. It was a small detail, a fleeting piece of conversation, but it was all Jessica needed. The plan, up to this point, had been missing a final piece, and Mirna, herself, had just handed it over. Jessica's mind locked on the words, Vietnamese iced coffee, and in that moment, the drink became more than just a beverage. It became the weapon. The clock on the wall read 3:30 p.m. when Jessica walked into Olivier restaurant. She wasn't late. She was a ghost in the machine, arriving long before her mark. She went straight to the receptionist and asked for a table for 4 in the non-smoking section. No hesitation, no looking around. She had her target. Once the table was secured, she didn't sit down. She walked into the heart of the place, her eyes moving with a cold precision that had nothing to do with finding a comfortable chair. She was surveying the territory, mapping out the angles, the blind spots, the quickest way to get the job done without any prying eyes. Mirna was still an hour and a half away, likely just living her life. But for Jessica, the game had already begun. The cafe was no longer a place for coffee, it was a hunting ground, and the hunter had just arrived. After sizing up the room, Jessica didn't linger. Her work wasn't done yet. She walked out of the Olivier restaurant, but she didn't leave the mall. She headed for a place called Bath & Body Works, a store selling soaps and lotions. A strange errand for someone with murder on their mind. But there's a certain kind of person who knows the devil is in the details. She brought 3 bars of soap, nothing special, and then made a peculiar request to the clerk. She wanted each one wrapped and placed in its own paper bag. To an outsider, it looked like she was buying gifts. But the paper bags weren't for a present. They were for a purpose that was about to get very, very dark. The clock read 4:14 p.m. when Jessica returned to Olivier restaurant, her hands full with 3 paper bags. The soap was a cheap trick, a flimsy excuse, but the bags were the real tools of her trade. She bypassed the open tables, the ones with a clear view and no secrets. Instead, she chose table 54, a secluded, half-circle sofa seat backed against a wall. The place was an open book to a man with a trained eye, but for her, it was a stage. It offered privacy, a screen, a way to do her business without prying eyes. The other tables, 33, 34, and 35, were empty, in plain sight, and wide open. But Jessica didn't want a clear view. She wanted a blind spot. She had a job to do, and the first part of it was finding the right kind of darkness. She settled in at table 54, and the paper bags weren't for show anymore. They were props in a play with a deadly ending. Jessica placed the 3 bags on the table, their flimsy sides creating a wall, a little fortress of paper. She then went to the bar. She wasn't thirsty. She was just playing her part, ordering a Vietnamese iced coffee for Mirna and 2 cocktails, an old-fashioned and a Sazerac for herself and Hani. The bartender didn't know he was an actor in a crime scene. After she paid, she didn't just walk back to the table. She looked around, her eyes moving with a cold precision, watching the room, checking for any prying eyes or suspicious onlookers. Then she walked back, a woman on a mission, a plan so bold, so well executed that the cashier, the bartender, and the other guests had no idea what she was about to do. The barista, a man with a job to do, made the coffee by the book. The liquid was dark and cold, the way it was supposed to be. He put it on the pickup counter. A simple drink in a simple glass for a simple customer. At 4:24 p.m., a runner picked it up and delivered it, placing it down right in front of Jessica. The boy had no idea he was delivering a death sentence. As soon as he turned to walk away, Jessica reached out and put a straw in the glass. A small, quiet gesture that no one noticed. The cocktails, the old-fashioned and the Sazerac, came next. They were just window dressing, a smokescreen. The real business was sitting there on the table. A perfectly ordinary cup of coffee, a ticking clock, waiting for a friend to arrive. The server walked away from table 54 at 4:28 p.m., leaving the 3 drinks and a woman alone with her thoughts. Jessica shifted her position, moving to the middle of the half-circle sofa. She moved the glass of Vietnamese iced coffee to her right side and then, with a surgeon's precision, arranged the 3 paper bags on the table. They weren't a careless pile. They were a shield, a flimsy wall built to block a camera's eye and a nosy neighbor's glance. The clock ticked on, and in the span of 15 minutes, from 4:30 p.m. to 4:45 p.m., a quiet evil was at work. With the paper bags providing cover, she took out a small vial of something sinister, sodium cyanide, and poured it into the coffee. A simple, almost silent act, and with it she turned a friend's favorite drink into a poison, a death sentence waiting in a glass for a woman who was still smiling, still laughing, still completely unaware of the grave that had just been dug for her. With the deed done, Jessica put the paper bags behind the sofa, out of sight. The stage was now clean, and the only thing left on it was a glass filled with a fatal cocktail and an empty chair waiting for a victim. At 5:18 p.m., Mirna and Hani walked in, all smiles and bright chatter. Mirna sat down, her face lighting up as she saw the glass sitting right in front of her. "Whose drink is this?" she asked, a simple question to an old friend. "This is for you," Jessica said, her voice a calm lie. "You said you wanted it." Mirna was surprised, a look of genuine gratitude on her face. "Oh my God," she said. "Why did you order it first? I meant to order it when I got here. Thank you for ordering it." She picked up the glass, a straw already inside. She gave it a quick stir and then, with a trusting heart and a grateful smile, she took a long, fatal sip. The coffee went down and a strange thing happened. Mirna's friend, Hani, who was sitting to her right, saw the liquid in the glass. It wasn't the dark, rich brown it was supposed to be. It had a strange yellowish tint to it. But before she could say anything, Mirna's face changed. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of shock and disgust. She waved her hand in front of her mouth as if trying to cool a sudden fiery heat. "This is awful," she gasped, her voice raw. "It's so awful." A simple complaint about a bad drink, but it was much more than that. It was the first sign that something was terribly wrong, the first echo of a crime that was now in motion. Mirna pushed the glass toward Jessica, a simple, innocent gesture, offering her a taste of what she called awful. But Jessica didn't take it. She just looked at her. Then Honey, Mirna's other friend, took the glass. She sniffed it first, then put it to her lips and took a small sip. The taste was sharp, bitter, and hot on her tongue, and she quickly put the glass back down. It was a fleeting moment, a small sign of what was to come. For Hani, the taste was just unpleasant. For Mirna, it was a death sentence. Within 2 minutes, the poison took hold. Her eyes went blank, she slumped back against the sofa, and foam started to form at her mouth. Her body shook with violent convulsions. The life drained out of her, and the bustling cafe, full of 100 conversations, was now a silent witness to a very public death. Hani knelt on the floor, shaking Mirna's shoulders, her voice a panicked whisper in a room that had suddenly gone quiet. "Mirna? Mirna?" But the woman on the sofa was gone, her eyes vacant, a white foam bubbling from her lips. And all the while, Jessica sat still, a statue in the chaos, watching. She didn't move. She didn't call for help. She just watched. Then the cavalry arrived, restaurant staff, with worried faces. They looked at Mirna, then at the glass of coffee on the table. The liquid was supposed to be a creamy brown, but it had turned a sickening yellow, the color of turmeric. They knew in an instant that this wasn't an ordinary medical emergency. A manager took the glass and put it aside, following protocol. The evidence, the simple, deadly evidence, was now safe, and the woman who had put it there was still just sitting, watching. The chaos swirled, and in the middle of it all, a woman in a cafe chair was wheeled away. They took Mirna to the Damayanti Clinic, a quick stop on a one-way trip to nowhere. The time was 5:30 p.m. A doctor took a look at her. Her body was stiff, her breath was shallow, but she was still alive, just barely. For 5 minutes, she was in a kind of limbo, caught between life and death. Then Arif, her husband, arrived. He didn't know what had happened, just that something was terribly wrong. He took one look at his wife and made a decision. He had her moved to a real hospital, Abdi Waloyo, where maybe, just maybe, they could do something. But the poison was already in her system, running through her veins, and the clock was ticking. They got Mirna to Abdi Waluyo Hospital at 6 p.m. The doctors, with years of seeing the worst of it, took one look at her and knew. No pulse, no breath, no heartbeat. The poison had done its work. But doctors, they have their rules. They tried. For 15 minutes, they worked on her, pumping her chest, forcing air into her lungs, a desperate dance with death. But it was a waste of time. The cyanide had shut her down from the inside out. At 6:30 p.m., they stopped. It was over. The game was over. The girl who had just gotten married, the girl who had a full life ahead of her, was just another case file, another body in the morgue, and all because of a cup of coffee. The show was over, but the work was just beginning. The body went from the living room of a hospital to a cold slab. The doctors did their work, and they found what they were looking for, the kind of truth that doesn't lie. They found a fatal amount of cyanide, a chemical that had torn through Mirna's insides, leaving a path of destruction in its wake. The coffee wasn't the cause. It was just the delivery system. With that piece of information, the case changed. It was no longer a story about a girl who just died. It was a murder case. The police, the detectives, and the prosecutors all got a call. A new game was in town, and the players were just getting started. The machine of justice is a slow one, but it grinds to a point. It took the cops a little over 3 weeks to put the pieces together. The name they came up with was Jessica. On January 29, 2016, she was a person of interest. The next day, she was a suspect in a premeditated murder, a title that would stick to her like a second skin. The show went on for months, a courtroom theater with lawyers and judges playing their parts. The evidence, cold and hard, was laid out for everyone to see. And on October 27, 2016, the gavel came down. The judge, in a voice as cold as a morgue, said the word guilty. The sentence was as long as the crime was cruel, 20 years in a cage. The woman who had died for a cup of coffee finally had her justice, as cold and final as the grave. The gavel came down, but Jessica wasn't ready to call it a day. She'd been handed 20 years in a cage, and she fought back. On April 27, 2017, her appeal was tossed out by the Jakarta High Court. But she didn't stop there. She went higher, all the way to the Supreme Court, filing a judicial review. She was a woman who didn't know when to quit. Or maybe she just believed her own story. The courts, however, weren't buying it. On June 7, 2018, the Supreme Court shut the door on her. The verdict stood. The sentence stood. The case was closed. Mirna's life, which had ended in a cafe, was finally settled in a courthouse. The case was supposed to be closed. The gavel had come down, the appeals had been denied, and the prison doors had shut. But in October 2023, the ghosts of the past came back to haunt everyone. Netflix decided to shine a light on the whole mess with a documentary called Ice Cold: Murder, Coffee, and Jessica Wongso. And with that, the whole country started talking again. The film didn't just rehash the facts. It raised a few questions of its own, pointing out holes in the investigation and the trial. One of those questions was why Jessica, the woman at the center of it all, was told she couldn't give any more interviews to the documentary's director. It made you wonder what was being hidden, what part of the story didn't want to see the light of day. The case of the coffee was a cold case in the public's mind, but the documentary showed that maybe, just maybe, it was still a hot mess. The case was a closed book, a cold file in a police vault. But a story like that never really ends. It just waits for a new chapter. And a new one came 8 years later. The year was 2024. The day was August 18th. The prison doors opened for Jessica Wongso. The courts had sentenced her to 20 years, but the parole board had a different idea. She'd been a model inmate, they said. Good behavior got her more than 5 years off her sentence. The woman who had been put away for murder was free again, walking around Jakarta just as she had before. A clean slate, they called it. But a case like this doesn't get wiped clean. Not for the family, not for the victim. It just gets a new coat of paint and a new kind of silence. A prison sentence is supposed to be the end of the story. But for a woman like Jessica, it was just a break between chapters. She walked out of that cage a free woman, but she wasn't done. The parole was a fact, but the word guilty was still a shadow following her, and she didn't like shadows. So she went back to the courthouse, back to the game. She filed another judicial review, demanding her name be wiped clean. The justice system had given her a verdict, and she was trying to appeal to a jury that wasn't there. She was a woman who had killed a friend over a grudge. And now, even with her freedom, she was still fighting to win. But the truth was still buried in the ground, and Mirna, the woman who had died for a cup of coffee, wasn't there to give her consent. The legal game finally ran out of moves. On a Thursday, August 14, 2025, the highest court in the land had its say. Jessica Wongso had pushed for a second round, a second chance to get the guilty sticker off her name. The Supreme Court looked at her request, then looked at the cold, hard facts of the case. They saw nothing new. Just a repetition of the same old story they'd heard and dismissed before. The first time, back in 2018, they said no. This time, they said no again. The case was closed, sealed, and put away. For a woman who had fought for so long, the final verdict was simple, clear, and cold. The truth, in the eyes of the law, was already settled. The woman who had died for a cup of coffee finally had the final word. The courts had their say. The final ruling came down like a hammer, not just on Jessica Wongso's case, but on the whole idea of what we think we know about people. The woman who had fought so hard for her freedom was now back where she belonged, at the end of a long, long road. The justice system, for all its flaws and all its delays, had a final word. It said that the life of a young woman was worth something. It said that the poison in her coffee was not an accident. And it said that the blame for her death fell on the one person who should have been her friend. It was a cold truth, and it left no room for doubt. But what do you think? After all the evidence, the appeals, and the documentaries, do you believe justice was served? What does this chilling story of a friendship turned deadly teach us about trust and betrayal? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're interested in more cases like this one, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more true crime content. Thank you for watching.